Welcome back to Psalms today, looking at Psalm 57, a familiar psalm. At least it is for me, because we used to sing, I think, most of the words from this psalm in a chorus growing up in church. Maybe you sang it as well, but it's a really good psalm to spend some time in. It's relatively short. It's a psalm of David. He again is in a perilous situation, hiding from King Saul in a cave. His life is under threat. And yet he's not just lamenting his circumstance and asking God to rescue him. There's a real note of celebration, really, coming through, a real confidence and trust in God and in God's character. And we're going to see that as we look at this psalm. One thing I want to point out, just almost as an aside, but it's interesting, is that there is a use of repetition in this psalm that is a little bit unusual. Typically, in Hebrew poetry, you'll have the same concept being communicated across different lines, but using different terms. And so it's sort of conceptual repetition rather than verbal repetition, where it's the same words being used. And yet here, we get some of that same word repetition. Be merciful to me. Be merciful to me. It reinforces, it emphasizes, it appeals to the emotions. Quite a powerful tool if you're giving a speech to use repetition deliberately, but not too much or it loses its effect. But here, look, takes refuge. I will take refuge. Down in verse 3, God will send, or he will send, God will send. We see the same idea again in 7, my heart is steadfast, my heart is steadfast. Verse 8, awake, awake, awake. The repetition of words is somewhat unusual, so I want us to notice that. If you want a technical term for it, I suppose it's similar or close to what the literary term would be epizeuxis. Doesn't really matter. And strictly, epizeuxis is the same word back to back, rarely with something in between. So it's not strictly that. But for Hebrew poetry, that's a lot of repetition that we're seeing there. But I want us to see a different sort of repetition. That's really where I want our focus to go, because there's 2 points in this psalm where David says the same thing, kind of as a marker, as a finisher, as a climactic phrase. And it's based on another type of repetition. This is like a repetition fest in Psalm 57. So let me just show you what I mean. Verse 3, we've got these 2 lines about what God's going to do, and then a Selah, so kind of think about it, reflect, pause, and then a standalone line. Standalone lines are slightly unusual. What does he say in this standalone line here? Well, God's going to send his steadfast love and his faithfulness. Now, when we see steadfast love in the Old Testament, we're kind of hitting on the key word of the Old Testament. And sometimes that key word is reinforced by adding faithfulness to it. So steadfast love, the chesed of God, his loyal, faithful, covenant, committed love for his people, a promise-keeping kind of love, if you like. That's the key theme that comes through so much. And in many places, we will find, if our radar is beeping, there's a reference to faithfulness nearby. It's kind of like taking a concept that's so important and reinforcing it with another word. It's one idea, really, communicated through 2 terms. It's God's loyal love that is loyal. It's God's faithful love that is faithful. It's God's persistent, committed love that is persistent and committed. Faithfulness is reinforcing the concept of the steadfastness, which is the way we've translated it in English. So here's David in a perilous situation, and he looks to God's steadfast love and faithfulness. What does that mean? Well, then we get verse 5, where he's able to say, be exalted, O God, above the heavens, let your glory be over all the earth. He's in a perilous situation, and dwelling on the steadfast love and faithfulness of God allows him to have a perspective that is beyond just rescue me, Lord. It's a perspective of celebration and anticipation that what ultimately matters, my greatest priority, is for God to be exalted and for his glory to be seen everywhere. And this comes again later. Look at the end of the psalm. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. Notice that that's a standard kind of repetition of concept rather than words between those two lines. I'll give thanks, I'll sing praise, O Lord, to you, among the peoples, among the nations. That's the way Hebrew poetry normally is. But that's beside the point, right? Look at what comes in verse 10. Your steadfast love is great to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Both of them are expansive, they're huge, they're vast, they're wonderful, and therefore, just like up above, is it verse 5, so again here in verse 11, be exalted, O God, above the heavens, let your glory be over all the earth. Read Psalm 57, allow the repetition in its various forms to impact you, but here's the thing that I'd love us to take away. In the most perilous, difficult, challenging of circumstances, as we focus on the steadfast love and faithfulness of God, it can redirect our priorities so that our ultimate concern is not for self. Our ultimate concern is for his glory, for his exaltation, and for everyone to know about him. Have a look at Psalm 57, share your highlights with others, and thanks for joining me. See you next time for Psalm 58.